Meet your new everyday companion, a versatile tote bag that seamlessly blends function with style. With multiple pockets inside and out, a dedicated water bottle sleeve, and a clever luggage handle strap, it's ready for whatever your day holds. The optional zipper closure adds an extra layer of security when you need it. Throughout the pattern, you'll find opportunities to customize the design to your taste, making each bag uniquely yours. For a durable and long-lasting tote bag, choose medium to heavyweight fabrics, 10 ounces or more. Consider using a lightweight fabric for the interior pocket and water bottle sleeve if your machine isn't powerful enough for really thick layers. Cotton poplin is an excellent option. If you're adding the zipper closure, you'll need a 14-inch long closed-end zipper. If you're not cutting your straps out of self fabric, you can use a wide grosgrain or twill tape for the straps. It should be 1.5 inches wide. If you're bias binding your interior seams, you can use bias tape or cut extra fabric on the bias. Other tools needed: sewing machine, iron and board. You'll need thread, all-purpose or heavy-duty, fabric scissors, snips, ruler, fabric marking tools, pattern weights, seam ripper, most likely, pins or clips, corner turner, denim sewing machine needle, and a zipper foot. Okay, so first step, we're just gonna hem up some of the pieces all at once. I like to kind of bulk do some of these things. So the first step, you are hemming the exterior pocket, the luggage handle strap, the interior pocket, and the water bottle sleeve. The pieces that live on the inside of the bag, the finished hem will equal 1/4 of an inch, and the pieces that live on the outside of the bag, each of these hems will finish at 3/8 of an inch. And you'll notice that some of them are hemmed on both sides and some of them are not. This is the water bottle sleeve, so when it is finished, folded up, it's gonna hang in the bag just like that, and your bottle is gonna fit inside of it. This exterior luggage handle strap, your luggage handle is gonna slip in between this pocket and the bag, the body of the bag, and hold your bag in place as you're moving throughout the airport or wherever you're going. This exterior pocket only gets finished at the top with the top opening of the pocket. This is the interior pocket, and it's hemmed at the top opening. The bottom of it, in a later step, will get a pre-press, and you'll see how this gets finished. I won't confuse you with too much information at the moment. So I'm gonna take these all to my machine, and I'm just gonna finish all these hems. So apologies in advance for my loud machine. So I'm just gonna get in here and start hemming all these pieces. This is one efficient trick if you don't know it already. I sewed for years before I saw one of my fellow studio mates stitch like this, and it's like connected instead of, pulling it out, clipping the thread, starting over. You're not only wasting some thread, but you're wasting time. Backstitch here, pull it out. I could switch threads to like a white thread so it would be more invisible, but I don't care. I think it's going to be cute with the pink. It's maybe being a little too particular if I were to stop and switch out my thread. This grid fabric is so cute. It's just like a really basic cotton shirting fabric, but it's got this like grid paper design. And we used it for one of the gable shirt patterns in a photo shoot we did in 2022. You can see that on the product page for the gable shirt. And I have no idea where we got it. So I go through my little chain of pieces here that all got hemmed together at the same time. This helps to prevent against that like messy bunch of stitches sometimes that show up when you start a line of stitching. It's just a really good practice to get into, and at first it does kind of feel like you need 3 hands to be able to do it, but once you start progressing as a sewist, you kind of figure out how to find that 3rd hand. Okay, now we're gonna line up the external pocket and the luggage handle strap on the exterior of the body. And you can tell which side is which because these drill holes right here It's a narrower distance between the two, as opposed to these drill holes, which are for the external pocket. And with drill holes, they're positioned such that they are sitting, I'll show you over here. Drill holes will always be positioned so they're covered by the piece that's sitting on top of them. So you'll notice that this drill hole is positioned a quarter of an inch in this direction and a quarter of an inch in this direction from the edges of this pattern piece. So I'm just going to place, it's not a bad idea to just double check and make sure that your piece is the same distance away from the side of the bag on both sides. And make sure that the top of this piece is also the same distance from here and here. Same thing goes for the pocket. I'm just going to pin this in place 5 inches away from the bag. Okay, so I'm just going to stitch these down. So all we're going to do is stay stitch these in place. We're just going to run a line of stitching 1/8 of an inch away from this raw edge. This direction, here, and here. Okay, I'm at the machine, and I'm just going to attach these external pieces to the body of the bag. And you can see here's a little closer glance at what I was referring to about with the drill holes. The drill hole is positioned here, and when this piece is placed on top of it, it's covering the drill hole. If you were using an awl instead of marking it with something that's washable, you would punch an actual hole into the fabric, and this pattern piece would just end up covering it. So you'll notice here, this is a raw edge. Will eventually be covered up by the strap piece, which you'll see how that works in a later step. So we don't have to worry about finishing the sides of this pocket piece at this moment, and we're just stitching 1/8 of an inch away from the raw edge of the external pocket piece. Same thing on the left side. And flip to the other end of the bag bottom, and we're stitching this luggage handle strap the same way as we did the external pocket, 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Now, if you are not using a luggage handle strap and you're using a second external pocket, then you would just do the same thing you did on the opposite end of the bag body. Pretty self-explanatory. And I'm using my whole hand here to hold this piece flat. It's already pinned, but you know, it can still move around a little bit, and I really just want to make sure that it gets stitched down appropriately and everything is symmetrical. Before we attach this interior pocket to the body of the bag, there is a step where you're pre-pressing this 1/2 inch seam allowance here at the bottom of this inside pocket piece. So I've already done that, and I'll show you what the purpose of that is in a second. Okay, so a couple things I want to point out here. We've attached the luggage handle strap and the external pocket. And you'll notice on this external pocket that the bottom is open, and that is the way it's supposed to be. Don't freak out. Okay, we're going to flip this body piece wrong side up, facing you. And then we're going to take the interior pocket. This is the side, this is the top here. This is what we've hemmed. And the bottom here is the pre-pressed seam allowance. So we have notches here and here to indicate where the top of the interior bag will begin. So the top of this hemmed interior pocket is lining up with this notch here on the side of the bag. And same thing goes for this other side. So not only do we have these two notches indicating where this interior pocket begins, there's also a notch here on the interior pocket that lines up with a notch on the side of the bag body. And you'll know why we need that in a step later, because that is for the water bottle holder. If you are using the pattern piece for the water bottle sleeve, you could pin it down now as well and just stitch it all at once. If you don't trust yourself stitching so many layers at one time, totally get it. Stitch this in place first, this side, and then come back and do this after. I'm just going to do it all at once. So I'm just folding this in half, wrong sides together. There's these notches here, so you know if these are matching, you folded it properly. And then we're just going to take it to the side and match these notches with the notch on the side of the bag body. Okay, back at the machine and I'm just going to secure these interior pieces, and I'm going to stitch 1/4 of an inch away from the raw edge, removing any pins that you might come across. And notice that I have stitched, show you a second here, notice I have stitched over this pre-pressed end, and I'll make that clear what's happening when we get to that step. Okay, same thing on this side, 1/4 of an inch from the raw edge. And you know, if you're newer to sewing, you might feel at this moment that you need about 5 hands to handle all these layers. So if you haven't started stitching already, there's no shame in just taking each layer one at a time. So you can stitch the interior pocket first and then come back and stitch the water bottle sleeve on top of it. Okay, both of these interior pieces are stitched in place. I went to the iron and did this step at both of the bag opening ends, which is pre-pressing a 1/2 inch in and then another inch. And you're going to do the same thing on this end, 1/2 inch and another inch. And we're not really going to do anything with that yet, but you will see why it's important and why we do it in a later step. These are the straps. This is a little professional trick that we're going to do that Lee taught us. So instead of just folding it directly on top and having these two folded edges meet each other, we're going to take this layer here facing us and slide it back like an 1/8 of an inch. Doesn't have to be very much at all. And we're going to stitch that down. If you are top stitching something, especially a thicker fabric like this, it's a really nice idea to go up in your stitch length. So I've been stitching at a 2.5, but whenever I do some top stitching that I want to be visible, I'll go up to like a 3. And it's just the longer stitch in a thicker fabric like this just looks really nice and more professional. So as I'm going here, this edge here that we brought in 1/8 of an inch from the layer on the underneath is just lining up with the inside of my foot here. So the stitch line, I'll leave it with, the stitch line is like a 1/16 of an inch away from this edge. And I'll show you what that looks like when it's finished. And the very end of the strap is lining up perfectly, so both layers of the strap have fed through my foot and the feet jogs at the same rate. So again, we're going to do the second strap, folding it in half and then bringing it back about 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm just holding this thread out here taut. So when we start with this back stitch, we won't have any messy bunches of stitches. That's what it looks like finished on what's going to be the underside of the strap. You can see there, set back a little bit. And on the outside, you can see it's just about 1/8. The stitch line just ended up being like 1/8 inch away from this folded edge. So now there is an optional part of this strap finishing. You could keep it really, you could stop here if you wanted. But if you could keep it really simple and just do another top stitching along 1/8 of an inch away from this edge, all the way down the strap, and then call it a day and have it be really simple. But one design element that I really like about this bag, and I think it, you know, elevates it a bit, is to do some running stitch lines down your strap. And again, I'm using a slightly longer stitch length because it just looks better. And you know, test it out on a scrap piece of fabric. If you are stitching at a 2.5 stitch length and you go up to 3 and you're like, I don't know, I feel like maybe it could look a little better, try it out another notch longer and see what you like. Okay, so this is what it looks like if you are going to keep it really simple and not add all those extra running stitches down the length of the strap. Certainly mark with, some sort of chalk or something that's washable where the center between these two edges are before you start doing the stitch. But I know that I am in the center of the strap, and because I measured, I know that if I line up my edge here of the strap just like a 1/16 of an inch over this 3/4 guideline, then I'm good to go. One little tip that helped me out so much when I was starting to learn how to sew in a real way when I was in school, one of my first teachers told me that you should never look at this needle as it's moving as you're sewing. Your lines will never be where you want them to be. They might not be straight, they may not be, the distance of the seam allowance that you need them to be. So you need to focus your eyes on another point. That's what these guidelines are for. If it's a 1/2 inch seam allowance, you would pay attention to this 1/2 inch guideline. Oh. Hope I don't eat my words here with the straight stitch lines. Got a little too confident. I think it's doing fine. I think I'm good. Okay, so next line of stitching, I found the center point between this line of stitching and this line of stitching, and I'm just going to run another stitch line down the length of the strap. And again, I have found the center point between the center stitch line and the stitch line all the way to the right. Going slow enough that I can continue to make sure that the stitch line is straight and consistent. And there we go. So when this gets washed, all of the fibers and the stitch lines that we've put in are going to kind of like settle in place, and it's right now it looks really flat. Everything's going to settle in, and there's going to be more of like a finished effect to this, which I'll make sure to show you once the sample's finished and I wash it. Okay, next up we're going to flip this over right sides up, right side facing you, and we're going to move this water bottle sleeve out of the, and we're going to need our straps. So remember back when we stitched these, we did something a little bit different on what will be the underside of the strap. So one edge of the strap is 1/8 of an inch in from the opposite edge of the strap, and this will be the underside of the strap. So it's important to point that out and pay attention to that in this step, because we are attaching these straps to the bag. I'm going to use my ruler here in a second just to double check things, and I'm going to use my pins. So basically this strap is just going to cover these raw edges of these extra, and these drill holes here will help us to know where to place the strap. So this strap is just going to cover this raw edge of this luggage handle strap, and we're going to just place it on top of this drill hole. So the drill hole is 1/4 of an inch in this direction of the edge of the strap and 1/4 of an inch in this direction in this end of the strap. And we're just covering, and it's running vertical up the body of the bag. And I'm just going to pin it in place just like that. And then you want to make sure that you don't do something that twists the strap, so once you go to use it, it's twisted. You want to make sure that you're doing this a little carefully. I'm going to bring you here more in the center of the frame. This is what you want the strap to look like in the end, so it sits on your shoulder appropriately. So same thing, we're going to find those drill holes, I'm going to cover them, and the strap is going to cover the raw edge of that luggage handle strap. Pin it in place. And one thing I do want to check is make sure that the distance between here and the distance between here of the strap is equal. So we're about 8 1/4 of an inches, and at the opening of the bag it is also 8 1/4 inches. So that's good. You certainly can have these straps kind of angle in at each other if that's something you want to do with the design. That's not the original intention of the design, so that's not what I'm doing. I'm keeping these distances equal to each other. We're going to go on to the other side and do the same thing to cover up the raw edges of this external pocket. So one thing I didn't mention on the other side, I'm just keeping things consistent. So when I finish this strap, the edges here were stitch closed. It's a little bit thicker on this side of the strap than it is on this opposite side. So I've been putting that towards the inside of the bag. The thicker part of the strap is on the inside here. And I'm just going to do the same thing just to make sure that there's consistency there. And also, for consistency, it's a good idea to have these straps, there are drill holes and it is marked, but it's just always a great idea to double check because drill holes can be off by 1/8 of an inch when you go to mark them, or this is like really bulky fabric. There could just be a little bit less precision in the markings and how things are getting placed. So it's just a great idea to keep checking your measurements for consistency here. So that is a good sign. I always remind myself to do all these little checks along the way to make sure that everything's where it needs to be. I would much rather take double the amount of time and prep work as I'm sewing, or even before I start sewing, before I finish it and realize that I'm happy with something and I want to redo it, and I'm just never going to redo it because it's finished. Okay, so I will be sure to show you while we're stitching exactly what we're stitching, but I'm just going to point it out here before we get to the machine. So what's going to happen is we're going to stitch these straps to the bag body, and what's going to happen is we're going to start at one end. I'm just going to follow this same stitch line that I made when I was putting all the top stitching into the strap. So this one farthest to this edge, I'm going to follow along right on top of it all the way up to when I get to this first pre-pressed edge. Then I'm going to pivot. I'm going to go across. And if you need to mark this with something that is washable and will come out later, do so. And then I'm going to continue down on top of this stitch line that we already put into the strap when we top stitched it, all the way down to the end. And then I'm going to repeat over on this side, and then I'll repeat on this side as well, here as well. Making sure, if you are using this feature, making sure that you've moved this piece out of the way. So what is going to happen on the inside once that's all finished, this stitching, the stitching that we use to attach the strap to the body is going to create these little pockets and a couple small channels here in this inside pocket piece. And so you're going to have, without even realizing what you were doing when you cut this piece out and started attaching it to the body, you're going to create these separate little pockets for better organization. And don't we all love being organized? I sure do. Okay, we're back at the machine, and I'm going to start on this end. And again, I've made sure that I have my water bottle sleeve out of the way of all the stitching. And again, this is top stitching on the external part of the bag. So if you were using a smaller stitch before all the other steps and you want to jack it up a little bit so you get that pretty stitch length, this would be the time to do before you start this exact step that I'm doing right now. Ouch. You can see I'm just stitching on top of the stitch line that I made previously. Okay, now I'm stopping right at this pre-pressed edge. And again, if you need, I'm just going to make sure I am exactly there. If you need to mark that with something washable, before you start stitching, do that. And now I'm stitching across the strap. I'm ending right in that stitch line that I made in a previous step. Pivoting. I'm going to take this pin out. Well, it's easy to do. And I'm just coming back down this edge of the bag. And as I'm attaching the strap to the bag, I am covering this raw edge of this luggage handle strap piece. take this pin out. And I'm going to move to the other side of the strap. Again, making sure this water bottle sleeve is out of the way. Putting the needle right down into that existing stitch line. Remove this pin. Covering the raw edge of the luggage handle strap right there with that stitch. This is open, and we're stitching right up to that pre-pressed edge. And that's right it. I'm going to pivot, stitch across the strap, ending exactly in that existing stitch line. And then I'm going to do the opposite strap, which is on the other end of the bag. Same thing, we have less to worry about because we don't have any internal pieces living underneath of these straps. But I'm going to start here on the inside. I'm just going to leave that pin in there so it isn't bothering anyone until I get to the end. Following the existing stitch line. Ending at the first pre-pressed edge, pivoting, stitch across the strap, and exactly in the existing stitch line, bring your bag through, stitch all the way down on top of this existing stitch line. I'm going to take this pin out, and the straps are attached. Okay, so you've attached your straps. So really cool thing that we did here, without even realizing, is we created these little pocket sections. And I also, I'm going to show you with my Sharpie, I also, when I've been using this bag, really like to use these channels for pen holders. If your pen has a little arm on here, it's really helpful because this is a little bit long, so if you have pens that you're putting down there, they might get lost and hard to get to. But you have 1, 2, 3 little pockets and these 2 smaller channels. And I really like this pocket for sunglasses. I always use mine for sunglasses. And now you're wondering, my pocket is still open at the bottom. How is this supposed to work? Don't worry, we're gonna get there. So we're gonna flip this back, right side's up, facing you. And we're gonna use the bottom piece. And you can see I've already been to the iron and I pre-pressed a 1/2 inch seam allowance on both of these long edges towards the wrong side of the bag. And now this bottom piece, we're going to look out for these notches. There's a notch here indicating the center point between these ends. Same thing on the opposite side. Those notches are going to line up. There's a notch that's at the exact center point between the ends of the bag. Right here, this notch and this notch will get lined up. Same thing on this side. We're going to pin that in place or use clips, whatever you prefer. You will also notice that there are notches here indicating where this pressed edge lines up with the side of the bag body. Clips would be really good to use in this scenario. I actually have clips. I just always gravitate towards pins whenever I am feeling the need to pin something in place, secure something in place. But you know, you do you. And I'm going to throw another pin in here, just making everything really flat and secure. So when you get to the machine, it's just kind of brainless and you don't have to worry too much. So this is a good point. I just want to mention that you see me like struggling just a little bit with those pins. This is a lot of layers, which is totally fine for, I think even this way with a home machine, I don't think you're gonna have any trouble stitching all this together. But if you, and there's 2 reasons I'm gonna flip this over, so the wrong side is facing up. If you had used a self fabric in something thick like this for the inside pocket, you're gonna be pinning through a lot of layers, and your machine's gonna be stitching through a lot of layers. And the layer issue is going to come into play when we go to stitch these side seams together as well. Not the end of the world. There are tools, hub jumpers, jigs that could be helpful. Walking feet can sometimes be helpful with thicker fabrics. Or maybe you have powerful enough machines that it's not an issue. But now that I have this flipped over, I want to point out where the stitching is going to appear when we stitch this bottom to the body of the bag. You can see my pin has gone through here, securing that bottom piece to the bag body. So there's going to be a stitch line that runs across the back of the body here and across here. And this stitch line is what is going to close the bottom of this interior pocket. So if you were wondering, I have just answered your question. So I'm going to take it to the machine and get it done. So this pre-pressed seam allowance is hiding underneath the bottom piece of the bag. And I'm just going to put the needle down through those layers. And I'm stitching like just very close, like 1/16 of an inch away from the edge of this bottom piece. So that this edge of the bottom piece is running on the inside of my foot here. So it's very close. Get everything positioned and in place before I start. And again, I'm using a longer stitch like I've been doing for all my exterior top stitching stitch lines. So what we've just done is we've covered the raw edge of the strap with the bottom piece. And we continue along this edge. You may not even realize it, but we are currently covering the raw edge of that exterior pocket. Okay, all right. Now we're gonna go to the opposite side of the bottom piece. I'm gonna pull this pin out. I'm using like all of my hands to make sure everything is just staying like very flat. It's like one giant presser foot my hands are at the moment. Take this pin out. Again, if you have that water bottle sleeve on the inside, it probably isn't really in danger of being in your stitch line, but just give it a glance and just know where it is. Make sure it's out of the way. Oops. And covering the last raw edge of the straps. Take this pin out. I did a great job making sure not to stitch over this. Okay, starting to look like a bag, don't you think? Okay, so the next step is going to be closing up these side seams, right sides together. Now is a good moment too, because you might not do it once it's finished, is to just make sure that you've clipped any of these loose threads, get them out of the way. Okay, so we are a couple points that we want to make sure to line up perfectly is going to be the edges of the bottom of the bag. So I'm just laying them on top of each other, and I'm gonna pin it like right basically into that seam, and just make sure that it doesn't move. And the tops. Do the other side, making sure to lay edges of that bag bottom on top of each other, putting a pin right before the edges of that piece. And then we're going to make sure that the top stays where it needs to be. Okay, so I'm going to go to the machine and I'm going to stitch all the way from the top here through these pre-pressed edges all the way down a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then this is when you're going to decide what kind of seam finishing that you might want to do. You might want to just zigzag the edges so that it doesn't fray. You might have a serger, you might want to do that. You may want to bind it. That could be a really nice detail. So now is the time to think that through. We have stitched the side seams together all the way down. We've stitched through all of these layers. Everything looks good. Same thing on the opposite side. Now we need to assess what we're going to do with these raw edges on the side seams. Okay, so I was trying to decide what I was going to do for my seam finishings, and my serger currently has black on it, and I'm feeling kind of lazy. So I fished this scrap out of my scrap bin, and I just realized if anyone is wondering where this fabric is from, they so graciously have this in their selvage. That's so nice, because I often forget sometimes where I get fabrics, and we bought this fabric like 3 years ago or something. But I just wanted to point out something helpful. First of all, if you printed this pattern with the A0 file, you're going to have some leftover paper. So keep it, use it. There's always a reason to use extra paper. One thing that we do talk about in our instructions, but you never know what people actually read and what they don't read, is cutting your fabric with paper, a layer of paper underneath. It is definitely helpful when you are working. I mean, it's a must to cut really, really delicate, like fabrics like chiffon. You actually cut things like chiffon between 2 layers of fabric, if I'm being honest. That's really the way you should be doing it. I don't really work with chiffon very often. I'm just going to press this really quick. So I don't think about it too much. Okay, that's better. I gave it a little press. But with shirting fabric, I can find it like a little frustrating to cut sometimes. So really most fabric that you cut, consider putting a layer of paper underneath of it, and my scissors, because it'll make it so much easier to cut, and look, like you can move it around easier when it's under a piece of paper. So I'm just cutting on my line, cutting at my bias. We actually have a video, a really cool video on not only cutting, but cutting a lot of bias all at once. Video we put together years ago. It's been on our YouTube page for a very long time. So if you wanted to cut a bunch of bias and just have it sitting around, you could do that. But I'm just really quickly going to cut out enough for me to use on the side seams of my bag. And yeah, you're probably saying, why are you cutting through paper with your fabric scissors? Well, we get our scissors sharpened, so doesn't matter so much. Save this scrap for something else later. Save this paper for later. Save everything. So you can, throw these strips out or use them for another craft project. So I have my bias here, and I've cut it 2 inches wide. That's because I'm going to double it up. I'm going to go to the iron, I'm going to press it with these ends matching each other, press it all the way down the length of the bias. Okay, so I have my bias all ready to go once my side seams are together. Okay, so here's the bias binding that I'm going to use to cover my raw edges of the side seam. It has been folded in half. It's 2 inches wide. It's been folded in half, pressed in half, and I have a right angle at the top here. And we're gonna end up trimming anyway. It's not super important, but I'll go ahead and trim off that end. So I've already completed it on one side, and it sort of worked out how I wanted it to go. Okay, and then we're just gonna trim this corner off here a bit so we can cut out some of the bulk. Okay, I have the raw edges of the bias. We're gonna match those raw edges with the raw edges of the self, and this is all gonna get hidden on the inside of this bag when we fold it over and stitch it down. So you don't have to worry about what to do with those ends. So I'm just stitching it a 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, making sure to line up all of those raw edges as we're stitching down the side of the bag. And just continue stitching all the way to the end where you trimmed that corner out. And these threads, and you're going to notice that we have this extra bias. I'm just going to trim this tail off. We don't need it. This is all also going to get hidden in the corner of the bag, so we don't have to worry about like wrapping it around and making it look all nice. So I'm going to take this to the iron really quick, and I'm going to press the seam open, press this bias tape towards the right side, get it really open flat, and then I'll show you how I'm going to finish that. Okay, I've come back from the iron. I've pressed this seam allowance towards the right side. The seam is opened really flat and really nice. And I'm going to flip it over so I can see what I'm working with here. This isn't super hard. What's going to happen is we're just covering the raw edges of the sides of the bag. And this edge here, because we folded the bias in half, is clean and perfect and nice. So all we're going to do is wrap this around. We stitched this bias to the self with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So we're wrapping this around, and all we're trying to do is get the edge of this bias to slightly cover the stitch line that we just made when we attached it to the self fabric. If you're just not used to bias binding your garments, this is a great time to practice because, it's an inside of a bag. My needle in my bias, I started stitching. All I'm doing is making sure to pull the edge of this bias over that last stitch line, and I'm going to stitch right on the edge of the bias. When you're down here at the bottom of the bag, there's just a lot of layers, so it can feel like you're wrestling it a little bit. It shouldn't be too hard. It should be pretty easy to cover up that previous stitch line. And if you pull it too far past the stitch line, that's okay. You're just gonna see, you're gonna end up, let me just show you. If I pulled this like really hard, and if I were to stitch through right along that edge of the bias, the stitch line, you can see where my needle's coming through. The stitch line is gonna be all the way over here, versus pulling it and just barely covering that previous stitch line. When I go to stitch down along that edge of the bias, the stitch line is going to come through right on the edge. I wonder if you can see this. There you go. It's going to come through right here along this edge of the bias, and it's going to be so pretty. And you're going to be so proud of yourself. And if you wanted a little extra help because you feel like you don't have enough fingers, you could, just like how I have my pin here, you could take pins and you could pin it, like a 3 inches or so in front of the needle, and take them out as you're stitching. Or you could use clips. Clips are very helpful. I feel like I have everything lined up pretty well. Feeling pretty good about how this is going to look. Oh, that I can see that right there. I may have just messed up, but we'll see what it looks like. Okay, moment of truth. Pull it over. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Pretty consistent all the way to the end. I'm just going to trim this bias off here. You could have just waited to trim your corner there all at once with the binding. It really doesn't matter because it's all, like I said, going to get concealed in the corner of the bag. So don't worry too much. Okay, so we have, you could stop here if you wanted, if you just wanted like a basic tote bag that's a rectangle, a flat rectangle. But we're going to take it up a notch. My edges are finished. They look great. I'm really excited I took the extra step of making the bias tape and applying it to the raw edges. I think it's pretty cool how it's coming together. I'm going to take this to the iron, and I'm going to, very carefully rustle this bag and press all of my seams open. Now we're going to take these corners and get them to the outside of the bag. So to do this, when you're turning out corners, we don't want to just turn the corners out and then mash all the seam allowance into it. There is a bit of an order to it. It's something that we talked about with Abigail, our guest designer, when we developed the choice pattern. She has a really organized way of turning out her corners, and it's easy and they turn out looking great. So in this case, I'm just going to fold all of this to one side, and I'm going to hold it and try to just push it through with my finger here and bring it through. And then I'm going to do this really quick, the same thing on the other side. Turn all of the seam allowance to one side. I have my other finger on the inside of the bag, and they're kind of working together to push this point through. And there's a possibility we don't even need a tool to get this turned out really nicely. It's looking pretty good. I think it still might, because I want these points to be really sharp. I am still going to use a tool. You know, there's all sorts of tools out there to turn corners out. This is actually a Hera marker. This is for quilting. Instead of like drawing lines on your quilt top to know where to stitch, you can, you know, press into it and it leaves kind of a mark without putting any chalk or any type of pigment onto your quilt top. But so anyway, I really like this point, so this is what I use. I know other people, Lee, one of our, she's done a lot of our sew along videos in the past. She uses a bookbinding tool, a bone folder, and that has a really nice like kind of gentle point on it. Okay, so these corners are looking pretty good. I think I would go back to the iron and just press all of this really, really flat. This is also a moment if you, I'm not going to do this, but if you want to have top stitching on the side seams of your bag, you could get this seam pressed out really flat, really open, and then add a line of top stitching all the way down. It gets a little tricky when you get down here. You can do it. You also don't need to worry so much about how far you stitch down, because you're about to see in the upcoming steps that we're going to end up folding this part up. So if you wanted to stitch down and stop like right about here, that works too. Do that. Okay, I'm back from the iron and my side seams are really flat. And I also just want to point out that how important it is for the bottom bag piece, these edges here to have lined up perfectly, because in this next step it's going to be really obvious if they didn't. So if you want to go back and just double check that and make sure that you have those lined up, now would be the time to do so. We have this rectangular bag. We want to take this, flip it onto its side, and we want to create these triangles. So we're going to make sure these seams are open really flat. We're creating these triangles. We're making sure that there's equal distance on the opposite side of this seam. So when we fold it up, we're going to take this tip of the triangle and we're going to it's going to meet this seam line here. If you wanted to come up beyond this seam line, you certainly can. The design here though is to meet at the seam line of the bottom. I'm going to reach inside the bag and I'm going to hold this point here. So there's kind of a lot of layers at the side seam. So going through the center of that point, like if I were to pin it right here, there's just a lot of layers. So I'm going to make it a little bit easier on myself. And I'm just noticing it's a little bit off center. So once I get to the machine, I'll just make sure that I have that positioned right. So I'm going to do it on the opposite side. Again, opposite corners, just make sure this is really, really pushed out here. And if you're finding that it is still really bulky, maybe give it a second look and just see if there is maybe some bulk that could be trimmed out. I'm going to go up just a little more. Turn that seam allowance to one side and use my fingers on both sides of the fabric to help work it through. And like at this point, if you wanted to take that point turner, just give it an extra little push before pulling it through. That's helpful. So what's going to happen once we stitch this all down, what we've done already as with pinning, is we're creating some volume to this bag. So it's giving you, instead of just being like a flat rectangular tote bag, it's giving you some width on the side of the bag. Okay, we're at the machine, so we can top stitch this triangle to the bag. So again, longer stitch length because we're doing a top stitch. So very carefully, we're gonna do, you're gonna watch me wrangle this bag. I'm just kind of pushing this corner through so it's flat on the table, and I'm pulling out, making sure there isn't like any straps or like interior pieces in the way. I'm just making sure it's all moved out of the way. So right now, this, what is going to get stitched is flat on the table. And you can see I've inverted these little corner points. I've pushed them out, kind of inverted them, and this is where we're going to start, and that's where we're going to stop. A part where you're sewing a lot of really thick layers. So this is that point. Once we start getting up here, it starts to get a little tricky for your needle, and we don't really want to break a needle. So if you need to just kind of walk it, I use my the foot of my machine just a little bit to give it like a little bit of power, but not too much. I'm mostly controlling it with the hand crank on my machine, and that's how the needle is moving. I'm at the very tip of this triangle, so the needle is down in the fabric, and I've turned the fabric, making sure again there's nothing underneath of all of these layers that shouldn't be there. Ooh. And I'm sewing all the way to the end of the triangle, but we have, you know, this is like, this fabric here is in the way. We want to make sure that it's not underneath of those layers that we're stitching down. There's no excess fabric getting stitched. And I'm just going to do a little bit of a back stitch here to secure that down. Yeah, I think it looks really good. You can take it to the machine and give it a nice press, and I'll show you what it looks like at the table. Now's the time to get in here and just make sure we don't have any loose threads, because once I start using a bag that I made, I'm never going to go back and trim threads off on the inside. It's just not going to happen. So we've created some dimension. We're going to push, let's do a really good job of pushing out these corners here. You can use a tool if you want to really push it out. I don't think we're getting close to having a finished bag. So the next part, we need to finish this opening. You're noticing that we did all this pre-pressing and like, what was that all about? So there is a part of this that is optional. If you're going to use the zipper closure, I'm going to show you how to prepare those pieces and put those into the opening. If not, I'm just going to walk you through how it would work. I'm not going to show you because I am going to put the zipper closures in this one, but just to show you how it would work. Really all we're doing is folding this 1/2 inch seam allowance in, folding it down 1 inch, and then, you know, you can stitch on the inside of the bag here so you can see. You're gonna stitch, and I would do this with a longer stitch again because this is gonna be visible on the exterior of the bag and it'll look really nice with that long stitch. You're gonna stitch like a 1/16 of the way along the edge. That stitch line is gonna end up being 1 inch down from the opening of the bag. It's gonna come all the way through. It's gonna stitch through here, so it's another way of securing the strap to the body of the bag. It's gonna go all the way around, and you're gonna be finished. That is it. That is all you'll need to do. We are gonna do that step even with the zipper closures put in, so you know you will get to see how that works. These pieces that I have cut, these zipper extensions, they have notches at the center on both sides here, all of them. Those are important and necessary to help you line everything up appropriately. So this is a 14-inch long zipper. I've taken it to the machine and folded the ends back 90 degrees and tacked it down on all 4 ends. I've also marked halfway between the zipper, which is 7 inches from each end. I'm also going to do it on the back side. So take the first zipper extension piece, note where the notch is right here in the center, and I'm going to take the zipper, the face side of the zipper is going to go towards the right side of the zipper extension piece, and we're going to line up this notch with the little marking that we made. Now, this is an important thing to notice and remedy before we move on. All zipper tapes, the width between the edge of the zipper tape and where the zipper teeth are, the width on that on all zippers can be different. This is, let's see, what is this? This is about 3/8. They can be a ½ inch, they can be wider. There comes a point in the assembly of this where the zipper will be sandwiched between two of these pieces, and they get stitched together with a ½ inch seam allowance. So we want to make sure that we have enough space to do that. And I don't want to be stitching right up against the zipper teeth. So I'm going to give a 1/4 of an inch space between the edge of the zipper extension piece and the zipper tape. And that might make more sense as we continue on and you see how it comes together. And I'm just going to pin this in place. I'm going to take this to the machine and I'm going to do a stay stitch all the way down the length of the zipper to secure it to this first zipper extension piece. Okay, so this is a moment where a zipper foot really comes in handy. So I'm just going to switch out the foot on my machine, installing this more narrow zipper foot so we can maneuver around the zipper teeth a little easier. And this is also not a top stitch, so I've made sure to reduce my stitch length to about 2.5. This exact moment you don't really need the zipper foot, but very soon you will, so may as well just switch it out now. And I'm making sure that the distance between the edge of the zipper tape here and the edge of this zipper extension piece is about 1/4 of an inch. And I'm just stitching with the edge of the zipper foot along the edge of the zipper tape. All we're doing here is making sure to secure the zipper to this piece. So when we eventually sandwich it in between both layers, it's in there correctly. And I've made sure that this center point of the zipper is matching with the center point of the zipper extension. Okay, next step is taking another one of the pieces of the zipper extension, right sides facing the zipper, and this is the back side of the zipper, remember? And we're just gonna line up this center notch with the center notch of the other zipper extension piece. So I'm gonna start at one end here with a ½ inch seam allowance. I'm gonna stitch down to the corner, pivot, and then stitch all the way along the length of this piece, pivot again, and then back up the opposite end. And we're going to use a little trick that we learned from our time working with our guest designer Abigail on the choice pattern for corners that I had never done in the past, but I do all the time now. So I'm stitching a ½ inch seam allowance. So when I get to about 5/8 inch away from the edge here of the fabric, I'm going to pivot, but I'm only going to pivot about 90 degrees. I'm going to do a couple stitches, pivot again, and make sure that I've lined up with a ½ inch seam allowance, and then continue on. And now is when you can see why it's important to have a zipper foot, so we can get up closer to the edge of these teeth here. If I had my regular foot on, we would be much farther away, and so much more of the zipper tape would be visible when it's finished. So with this foot, I'm able to get much closer, and you'll be able to see how much better that looks once it's all finished. So I continue along at ½ inch seam allowance, making sure that my center notches are still lining up. And I also want to make sure that the opposite ends down here are going to match up at the end. So I'm just holding onto them really tightly as I'm stitching to make sure that both the fabric on the top and the bottom is being fed through at the same rate. And when you get closer to this zipper pull here, it can get bulky and it can disrupt the stitch line that you're working on currently stitching. So in case you didn't see that, I zipped it out of the way, moved it down, continue stitching until we get to about 5/8 of an inch away from this edge. Just gonna check it. It's a little far. Do one more. Yeah, that's about 5/8. And oops, only pivot about 90 degrees. Couple more stitches. Pivot again. We're at ½ an inch. And continue stitching the length of this end here.
We've stitched along the straight line. We've pivoted and made this blunt edge and then continued on closing the end. So next we are going to trim some of this bulk out. We're going to wrap the seam allowance on the top here towards the back and the seam allowance on the end here towards the front, organizing the seam allowance in that corner. I'm like pushing my thumb up here all the way to the corner, so as I turn it through, it kind of helps guide a lot of the bulk towards the right side. And you can pull on this tape gently to help it. It definitely helps with that first attempt of turning everything to the right side, to have all of that seam allowance really organized and tidy on the inside, but you still might need a tool to help you push out all of the remaining seam allowance there, all of the remaining bulk. So I'm just going to do it again down here, the opposite end. Trim first, trimming really close to that stitch line, but making sure not to trim through it. Folding the seam allowance on the end here to the back, seam allowance on the top here toward the front, pushing my thumb all the way up into this corner and flipping through. Especially with this thicker fabric, you can really wrestle with it to get it to look really neat. So anything that helps you, just full stop, anything that helps you is worth it. So okay, so now I have one side of the zipper tape encased in one side of the zipper extension. I'm going to take this to the iron. I'm going to press these seams open on both sides, and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, so I've gone to my iron and I've pressed my seams open. This next line of stitching for the top stitching, it's kind of your decision how far away you want it from the edge of this piece. I'm just going to run the edge of this zipper foot along the edge of the fabric because I kind of like a closer look. You can also completely skip top stitching if you don't want to do the step, but I, however, feel that just gives a really nice finished look, so I would recommend it. And if you want I'm a little bit too far. If you want a wider distance between that stitch line and the edge of the fabric, go for it. And I'm just noting, like, as we're stitching, I'm making sure to match these raw edges over here to the left so they match one another. So as I stitch along, I'm making sure that everything is in the place that it needs to be. And every time I stop, I'm leaving my needle down in the fabric. And since I'm still using the zipper foot, notice how I'm not even bothered by the zipper pull being here in this moment. It's not getting in my way, which is great. I think if I had my original foot on here, it would be too wide and it's getting in the way, so I would make sure to leave my needle down in the fabric, lift my foot, pull my zipper pull down and out of the way. I'm just going to make sure this pull is out of my way as well. Checking to make sure that I have ended where I need to. Okay, so that's one side complete. Okay, we're just going to complete the same thing we did on this first side, really, except we have a little bit more to handle. So first thing is I'm going to match this first centered marking with this center notch here, but I am going to make sure that it is about 1/4 of an inch away. The zipper tape is 1/4 of an inch away from the raw edge of the fabric. So we have a little gap there. And because the clip, I don't know, yeah, I guess it reaches. You can put a clip in there and it can hold it in place pretty well. I will do that. And since I have my zipper foot already installed, we are in luck because I'm just going to move this zipper pull out of the way, and all I'm doing is securing this opposite side of zipper tape to this other side of the zipper extension. Move this pull out of the way, making sure that I'm maintaining 1/4 of an inch gap. And same thing, continuing down to the end of these extensions. Okay, so the opposite side of the zipper tape is secure, and we're going to take the 4th and final zipper extension piece, right sides facing the back side of the zipper. And first and foremost, let's line up the center notches here. Throw in a clip. Make sure that your ends are going to match really well. And this zipper pull is bulky and in my way, so I'm just going to pull it down. Pull it down as far as you need to, really, just to get it out of your way. So we're stitching a 1/2 inch seam allowance down here. You just want to make sure, if we've done it right, then there's no chance that we're going to run into this stopper on this zipper, which we have. So a 1/2 inch seam allowance. We're going to do the same thing with the corner that we did on the opposite side. I'm going to stop about 5/8 of an inch away, turn 90 degrees, put in a couple stitches, pivot again, and stitch a 1/2 inch seam allowance down the length of this zipper extension. Get close to your pin or your clip, take it out, and leave your needle down in the fabric. Lift your foot, pull this zipper pull back up, check your ends, make sure that you have them matched. Maybe you have them pinned. I'm just going to hold them with my hands here, just to make sure that top and bottom feed through this zipper foot and the feed dogs at the same rate. And then when I get to, I'm just going to put a couple stitches in. And then as we're stitching down this final end, you want to make sure that this opposite side of the zipper extension is out of the way. We don't want to stitch over it, so just move that out of the way. We're going to trim both corners, fold our seam allowance, push this through. It's already a great start. And kind of like shimmy it up there, work it out, work all the bulk out to the corner, go to the opposite side, push one side of the seam allowance towards the back, one towards the front, push it through, work that out so it's nice and clean. And before I begin top stitching here, I'm just going to take it to the iron and press this open. Again, I'm just making sure that these edges here are matching one another. I did a better job pressing this time, just really forceful with the fabric, and made sure that it was doing what I wanted it to. So pivoting here at the end and finishing this final end off. Okay, then now we have a finished zipper extension that works. Okay, here we are with our zipper extension, and this is the opening of our bag. So we already pre-pressed many steps back this first 1/2 inch seam allowance here, and notice these center notches right here. These are going to be helpful when we're attaching this whole piece into the bag opening. So I like to just visualize how things come together before I start stitching. So this is the right side of the zipper. We want it to essentially sit here in the bag. So what we're going to do is match up the notches here at the center part of the zipper extension with the notches at the center part of the bag opening. And we need to stitch them right sides together. So I'm going to turn this to the right side of the bag, the outside of the bag, line up these notches here. Clips are always good here with this heavier fabric. And this is going to get stitched a 1/2 inch seam allowance from one end of the zipper extension all the way to the other end. And it's going to run along this pre-pressed edge, which will eventually get folded under. And this is what your zipper extension will be coming out of. And while we're at it, I'm just going to do this opposite side as well. So we need it to finish like this in the end. So we're going to need right sides together, right? So I'm just going to open this zipper, flip this to the right side of the bag, the outside of the bag, match up these center notches here. I'm out of clips, so I'm just going to throw a pin in here. So what's going to happen is we're going to go to the machine, and this whole zipper extension is basically going to be turned with the wrong side of it facing you and facing to this opposite side, and it's going to encase this one side of the bag because we have a closed end. This end is open, so there's nothing to worry about over here. So we're going to go to the machine, stitch this at a 1/2 inch seam allowance on this side, and do the same thing on this side as well. I've lined up my center notches with one another here, and I'm going to just start at the end of this zipper extension, get my bag set up, matching all raw edges as we stitch along. And you can see as you get down here, there's a lot happening. So just take your time, move things out of the way that don't need to be there, line up the raw edges every inch or two, adjust again, and just keep doing that until you get to the end of the zipper extension. So I have one side of it secured to the opening, and now I'm going to flip it. I'm going to start at this kind of like messy end here with all this going on with the closed end. And I've already secured my center notches, so we know the zipper is being put in the right spot. I don't think it's completely necessary to have a notch on the bag opening where these zipper extensions start and stop, but I may end up including them in the pattern after I'm filming this video. So if you see notches there, then you're welcome. Okay, so I've taken it to the iron. I've pressed all these seams open. We have a bag opening that works, so that feels great. So now the last step is we just need to close up these ends here so it looks really nice. So what we're going to do is open the zipper opening. And you can see we pre-pressed this for a reason. 1/2 inch first and then 1 inch to finish. So what is going to happen, you can go back and repress this if you feel like some of the crease has come out. What's going to happen is we're going to stitch through the zipper extension layers. You're going to end up stitching through these straps as well, so we get a little extra reinforcement where the strap is attached to the bag, which of course any of you have owned a tote bag, you know that it's very important because over time these straps will come apart from the body of the bag if it's not secured properly. Then the next step after that really is optional, but I'm going to make sure to include it in the instructions and in my final sample, is to do another top stitch along the very top edge of this bag. I'm going to do it probably with the right side of the bag facing me because I want to make sure that I stitch over this existing stitch line that we put on when we attached these straps to the bag body. Okay, so we have the zipper open, so we can work with this really easily. I am just going to start at this open end here, the open end of the zipper, and make sure that this is folded at the appropriate widths. And it's also really helpful if you want to throw some pins in here just to hold things in place as you're sewing along. That's, That definitely won't hurt anything. So these layers here, they're getting really thick. If you find yourself struggling with your machine, not wanting to stitch through them, you can use a hump jumper. We have a video on our YouTube about how to use a hump jumper, aka Genamajig. You can also fold up some cardboard and place it under here to create that height. Your foot gets a little help going over the really bulky areas. That's definitely come in handy anytime you have sewn a pair of hard pants. So I'm starting a little ways back from the seam where all the bulk is, and I'm not going to back stitch yet. When I come back around, I'm going to finish it with a back stitch. And I'm just making sure to stitch right along this edge of this folded edge here. So the inside of my zipper foot is following this folded edge of the fabric. And if you need to just walk your foot over these bulky sections, you can do that. So now we've reached the point where I'm sewing through the layers of the seam allowance from the zipper extension and the strap that's on the outside of the bag. And you'll be able to see in a little while what that ends up looking like. I'm just going to continue on. Now it gets a little tricky when you are working with this closed end of the opening. So just take your time, flip it open, make sure that your seams are aligning perfectly. Throw a pin or a clip in at any point that you need. Make sure that your opening is still folding along those pre-pressed fold lines. And anytime you need to stop to adjust something, make sure your needle is down in your fabric. So when you lift your foot, nothing moves and everything is cool. My seams are matching over here, so that is great news. And I'm going to use the help of both of my hands to get through that. Okay, this is really the trickiest part when you have this zipper extension because, yeah, there we go. So I was having a little bit of bunching happening because there's probably at some point along the way the top and the bottom wasn't being fed through at the same rate, which it wasn't a lot, so I'm not really worried about it. I think the zipper is going to close up just fine. It was just a tiny bit just to make it a little tricky and frustrating when I got to that closed end of the zipper extension. So I just used both of my hands to pull it taut. Show you again. I used both of my hands to pull it taut as I was feeding it through, just making sure to line everything up. And this is a really good moment to point out because we're going to eventually get to the end where we started. So when we're getting to that end, we want to make sure that all layers has been fed through at the same rate underneath that foot. So I'm going to go maybe another like 4 inches. And I'm just going to check and make sure, pull this, like, you can't see because it's out of the camera, but I'm like pulling on this opening and making sure that everything is going to line up and we won't have any extra bunching at the end. Starting to see my lower hand here in the frame. I'm using both of them to pull all the layers through at the same rate to make sure that we have a really clean opening. And now you can see we're back to where we started. Have this stitch here. Make everything as flat as I can. Continue stitching. I'm just going to stitch right over and then do a back stitch. And I like to do the back stitch as close to the side seam as possible, but there's a lot of bulk there, so doing a back stitch on top of all that bulk might be a little tricky. So, okay, so we have an opening that is finished. The zipper works, and I said this back at the table that I would probably add another line of stitching here along the opening of this bag, and I want to make sure that it goes right over this line of stitching that we included when we attached the strap to the bag body. So I'm going to do it with the bag facing me. I'm gonna start with the side of the bag that has the open end of the zipper, and I'm just gonna stitch. It's like right on the edge here. Yeah, and I am on the side seam here, not dealing with as much bulk, so I'm not that afraid to start there. Top stitch along this edge, and as you get to the strap, you just want to make sure that your stitch line is lining up with that existing stitch line from before. Always keep your needle down in the fabric as you adjust what you're sewing for the next like 4 to 6 inches. Here I've come up against the next strap, so we're just going to do the same thing, making sure to stop top stitch right over that existing stitch line and continuing on the opening of the bag. So now we're back at this closed end part of the zipper, which is always a little bit, you know, of a wrestling match, but it's gonna be okay because you're just gonna stitch a couple inches, stop with your needle down in your fabric, adjust, make sure everything going under your foot is really flat and clean. Do it again, adjust. And then right before we hit this next strap, I'm just gonna pull the rest of this opening out so everything's nice and flat. I can see what I'm working with and continue on. And now we're getting back to where we started. And I want to make sure to line up with the stitch line exactly where we started. And I'm going to go past all the bulk on this seam allowance, and then I'm going to put in my back stitch, just a tiny little back stitch there, so it's not super noticeable. Come in here. It's looking really great. It's a really clean finish. One thing, so I have these 2 lines of stitching here that are reinforcing the strap to the bag body. That is probably enough for what I'm using this bag for. That's kind of the good thing about a slightly smaller bag. I'm not putting everything I own in this bag and putting so much stress on the straps of the bag. However, if you feel like you are just hard on tote bags and this strap or any one of the straps is just eventually going to bust off, you could either do a couple more stitches over. I think it starts to look a little bulky and messy, so I probably wouldn't recommend that. You could add an X stitch here in this box, and that certainly will add a lot of reinforcement